a bad file. I'm going to try to read, not from my file called example.txt, but now I'm going to try to read from a file that doesn't exist called example2023.txt. Okay? See what happens. I think there should be an error. There is our IO error. That file does not exist. You can write to a file that doesn't exist. That's a good thing. You don't really want to write over a file that already exists. That can be bad. You could destroy your computer. Please don't do that. But you can't read from a file that doesn't exist. Example2023.txt does not exist. We cannot read from that. So we get our input-output error, our IO error. All right? So this is a nice, clean, small program that's really, really nicely documented. I have a good video on Java doc comments. When you use this / and / and kind of type things in nicely, it essentially makes like a web page, an HTML file for all of your nice information that looks like this. And I have another video on that. But like, look at how beautiful this is. I mean, this is just, it literally just looks like Oracle. You can see all your methods. It's commented so well. It's beautiful. All right, thank you. Back this program right here called fileprocessing.java. Fileprocessor.java. So this class, first we're going to have a file path. And we've got our constructor. If we're given a file path, we'll just store that in the field, file path. And so now we have some cool methods. We've got read file, we've got write file, and we have append or add to file. And then we have in the main, we sort of have baked in our little tester class here, but we could have like a file processor tester.java and tuck main in there as well. But so let's just walk you through a couple things here. So if you're reading from a file, using a string builder object is it's very, very helpful. Typically when you're doing file reading, typically people will use a buffered reader. So you make a buffered reader object, and what you do is you feed it a file reader with your file path. So then that buffered reader, it has the file with the file path. And then you can just rip line by line. This is actually a really interesting line. Let's unpack it. You say store in line, use your buffered reader, and you do read line. So you store that in line while that's stored into the string, while that content's in string called line. When you read the line, when you store a string in there, when it's not equal to null, that's when you're going to use your content builder, and you're going to append, meaning add the next line, and you're going to use handy dandy system line separator. So it's just going to bake in nice spacing in terms of /ns. Okay? So that's beautiful. We're just going to build all that. So we're just going to read all the information. We're going to take it line by line, string by string, bake it all together. And then since we're returning a string, we'll return our string builder's contents as one giant string. Beautiful. So we can read, we can just rip line by line. And of course, you got to be careful. We could certainly have an input-output exception if let's say we're trying to read from a file that doesn't exist. That'd be no good. Excuse me. We can write to a file. Again, we could be throwing an input-output exception, IO exception. Now instead of buffered reader, when we're writing to a file, we use buffered writers. Notice how we equip it with a file writer object with the given file path. And this is so nice. We just take our buffered writer object, writer dot write, and then we just give it the content, which is a string. Boom. That is it. Just write to a file. Perfect. You can also add to the end of a file, which is appending to a file. Notice again, we've got our buffered writer in each of these situations. We now have that second argument with our file writer to true, meaning it's true that we're appending. Typically it's false. We're essentially just overwriting, so you got to be careful. Don't mess with like files on your computer that you don't want to change or ruin. You know, make sure it's like new files that are like text files and they're safe. But if you have that second argument, appending is set to true. That means add to the end. Now instead of writer.write, it's writer.append, and you just throw in the string, which is the content, and it'll just put at the end of the file instead of overwriting the whole thing. So these are the common big three things you need to know when you're messing with files. You want to read from a file, you want to write to a file, or you want to append, meaning just add to the end. And now let's try it out. Let's run this. All right, it's really thinking for a moment here, folks. We can use our file processor object. We'll make some text file called example.txt. Now we can feed it a string, and we can tuck that in the file example.txt. Here it is right down here. This is the first line of the file. We can then show that appending works. We're going to actually append, meaning add to the end. There's our second line. This is an additional line. We can even show that we can read from the file. And that's actually how we got to see all of this information. We used our, we got the file contents, and we read that from the file, and then we just spit it out. So we were able to spit out all the strings in example.txt. Notice how we're going to try all this stuff. You always got to try this stuff, because perhaps something goes wrong. You need to catch those exceptions. Recall above, we mentioned that we might throw some input-output exceptions. So you got to make sure that anytime you're messing with files, or just always anticipate possible errors that you might throw. Put those in a try and catch block. And there you have it. So wait, let's just for fun, let's get an error. Okay. Just for fun. Let's call it example 2023.txt. Path to file bad, FP bad. I'm going to show you that this is not going to work. Okay, so now I'm going to try to read from this file. Just to be clear, this file does not exist. Let's see what happens. Let's run it.